Have any of you ever wondered what it would be like if intelligence systems suddenly called you up one day and were like, hey, do you wanna direct the next Fire Emblem game? Well, that will probably never happen to any of us here. It's still funny to imagine what it would be like, and that is exactly why I decided to make this particular video. It's safe to say that over the years, I've accumulated a fair bit of Fire Emblem experience, so if I got to decide, this is how I would do it. This is how I would make the ultimate Fire Emblem game. Before we start this video, I think it's very important to point out that this isn't how I would design a Fire Emblem game to appeal to the average Fire Emblem fan, but rather how I would design it to cater to myself. The two are very different after all, as what I want in a Fire Emblem game may not be what the average Fire Emblem fan would want. I might make another video in the future where I talk about how I would go about trying to design a Fire Emblem game that would cater to as many people as possible, but for now, I am just going to have fun deciding on what I would personally want to see myself. Anyway, I'm just going to start listing features, people I want working on the projects, and all those little details. So before we delve into the story and meat of my Fire Emblem game, let's talk about things such as artwork, design, and music. First and foremost, I'd want my Fire Emblem game to return to a more simplistic, cartoonish 2D style. That doesn't mean back to simplified Game Boy Advance style graphics, but preferably away from the engine of the past 3 games, Echoes, Fates, and Awakening. While the engine certainly runs smooth, I find the art style very off-putting. To quote my designer Mina, nothing in Awakening and Fates looks like it has any weight to it. I miss the amazing animations of the Game Boy Advance style Fire Emblem games, and since I assume my game would come out for the Switch, which seems to sort of have revitalized the 2D styles of games, judging by the upcoming games, it should be possible to make a 2D engine for a Fire Emblem game that looks both fresh and exciting, and mixes the old with the new. Now, let's talk about what kind of people I would like to have on my team, and in terms of soundtrack and music, I would like to hire the composers of Awakening, because I believe that, to this day, Awakening probably has the strongest soundtrack in the entire franchise. Seriously, the music is amazing. I listen to it all the time when I work. Now, for the artwork, I would like to hire the artist who drew Effie, Hawkeye, Hinoka, and Nephany for Heroes. I absolutely love this art style, and this is exactly how I would like my official artwork to look like when my game releases. To assist me with the writing, I would like to hire the lead writer of Echoes, as I believe that game has the best story to date, even though the writers had the luxury of working on a skeletal frame of another game in Gaiden, but I still think that in spite of that, they did an absolutely spectacular job with the newest Fire Emblem game. As for the CGI cinematics, I would like to go with the cinematic style of Awakening. Now, while I loved the Echo style anime cinematics, sometimes they were a bit choppy and not as great as they could be, although they certainly had a lot of charm to them. Though I honestly think that Awakening had the best looking cinematics. To this day, when I compare it to the other games, I find them to be the most breathtaking. However, I would like the Echoes localization team to help me with the North American and European release of my game. I think that they did a wonderful job with localizing Fire Emblem 15. Honestly, it might just be one of the best localizations to date, so that would definitely be good. In terms of voice acting, I'd prefer the main story of my game to be fully voiced, but optional dialogue and support conversations would not. Of course, if this is the game of my dreams and my budget was unlimited, I'd of course love to have everything be fully voiced, but even in my dreams, I like to have realistic goals. I ideally want to see the vast array of supports that we had in Fates and Awakening, with each character having between 5 to 10 different supporting partners, and that's sadly just not going to happen if all of these conversations need to be fully voice acted. As I said, having the main story voice acted is good enough for me. The supports can be text only, or you might also incorporate the Awakening and Fate style. Huh? Yes? Yeah, you know, the sounds they make whenever they do talks, that seriously works for me. At any rate, I just want to see more than 1 to 2 supports per characters like we saw in Echoes, and I want them to be long and meaningful and flesh out the backstory of my characters. Anyway, with all that established, let's talk game mechanics. First and foremost, the core gameplay of my game would not be changed at all. In terms of how it feels and plays, it will be a traditional Fire Emblem game. We aren't gonna try something funny similar to what Echoes did. However, I will be cherry-picking a couple of mechanics from previous installments, as well as scrapping a few others. Now, for example, the pair-up function from Awakening, that is gone. However, I would add the rescue command from the Game Boy Advance series to make up for it, but I would make it so that mounted units couldn't be rescued, only infantry. It doesn't make sense to me that someone can pick up a horse or a Pegasus no matter how big they are. However, I'd make it so that mounted units could rescue units with less severe penalties compared to infantry units. After all, they gotta mount. I'd also bring back weapon weight and constitution, and before you start raging in the comment section, I would make the game calculate the speed for you, displaying it on your character so you wouldn't have to. I'd even include a little icon on the minimap next to characters currently being slowed down by a heavy weapon to give the player some indication that said unit is not at its full speed. In addition to the rescue function, I'd also incorporate the shove mechanic from the Tellius games. I'd also include two additional mechanics, a swap function which allows two allied units to swap their positions, as well as a drag back function. There would be special class skills in place allowing units to push, swap and drag back enemy units as well, and this would also be dependent on constitution. You would need to be bigger than your target in order to shove them. Now, let's talk the weapon triangle. I would personally incorporate the weapon triangle from Fire Emblem 4, with swords, axes, and lances alongside fire, thunder, and wind magic, but I would also incorporate light and dark magic into the triangle as well. Both, however, would go back to being neutral, but I'd really amp up their stats to make them more useful. In my game, the archer curse won't be a thing. In addition, I'd make weapon ranks affect the severity of the weapon triangle, similar to how Shadow Dragon first did it. But in addition to that, I'd make the weapon triangle really matter. We're talking something along the lines of 20% hit and avoid, like in Fire Emblem 4. I personally love it when the weapon triangle is really relevant, because it gives you as a player more control of the situation by ensuring you are using the correct weapons at all times. More control to the player is always good, in my opinion. Now, let's talk weapons. I'd go back to the classic pre-Fates durability system. I didn't like the way Fates made all weapons unbreakable and then trying to tone them all down to the same level by incurring bothersome penalties and side effects. Nah, give me back my breakable swords, please. I like conserving my weapons and managing my resources. That's personally one of the most enjoyable aspects of Fire Emblem to me. My Armor Slayer should be limited in its use. It makes me feel better when I use it effectively, and horrible when I don't. As I said, resource management is what makes Fire Emblem fun, at least for me. Also, when it comes to stat debuffs, they will certainly be present in my game, they will just be very rare. They will come in the form of rare seal skills like Seal Defense and Seal Strength, but gone are the days of weapons debuffing enemies, and in particular, weapons debuffing their own wielders. I never got the whole Silver Sword gives you debuffs thingy. It always felt incredibly weird to me, and it just made me not use silver weapons in Fates. As I said, the stat debuffs will be present, they will just be very rare, like with very pricey enfeeble staves, and stats will recover at the rate of 1 point per turn, just like in Fates. I personally enjoy the prospects of debuffing a very strong boss to give myself a fighting chance, but I got really tired of the million ways Fates constantly debuffed my stats, making me lose complete track of how strong my units actually were in the present moments. I would also bring back leadership stars from Thracia 776. They would work the same way, being present on certain characters, including the main character, giving a stacking 3% hit and avoid per star to everyone in your army, alongside 1% critical avoid like in Fire Emblem 7. However, I'd work these leadership stars into the game in a brand new way. You see, in my game, leadership stars would be rewarded for proper play, similar to the tactician stars of Fire Emblem 7, but a lot more integrated into the story. At the end of each map, a scoreboard would show up, similar to in the Advance Wars games, as well as similarly to what Soren did with Ike in Path of Radiance after each fights, reflecting your total turn count, experience earned, bonus objectives completed, etc. And your main character would get something called leadership experience, depending on how well you did. After a certain threshold is reached, your main character would level up and gain a leadership star. This means that playing well and quickly would reward your main character with better leadership, boosting your army's morale. Consequently, doing bad things, such as failing objectives, losing units, or doing dishonorable deeds, would punish you by removing leadership experience instead. In my game, I would really focus on the burden of leadership for the main characters. Side characters like the game's Jagan would come with a few leadership stars of their own, but such characters would be very rare. Needless to say, enemies will also have leadership stars, and hunting down enemy generals to reduce enemy leadership would be a recurring strategy for the player. I would also bring back combat experience from the Tellius games, but I wouldn't be so vague about how much you get and how you obtain it. Instead, during the battle preparations before each map, the player will be clearly instructed about what to do in order to obtain bonus experience. Doing side objectives like saving a village or completing the map in a specific amount of turns would yield bonus experience, which could be used in the base to level up your units. Speaking of the base, I would also completely borrow the base function from Path of Radiance and Radiant Dawn, as I think those games did this the best. The camp would change depending on your story location, and there would be talk conversations, support conversations, and even merchants showing up with limited stock equipments. Oh, and I'd also have forging be a thing too, but in my game, forging wouldn't cost just gold, but would require various resources like it did in Echoes. Said resources would need to be collected from the battlefield, stolen from enemies, or be found in treasure chests. Now, let's talk support conversations. I would do something similar to the Game Boy Advance games, but add in some elements from Shadow Dragon. Instead of having to stand next to each other, characters would simply need to be deployed together for a set number of maps to unlock their respective C, B, A, and S rank supports. Some supports would be slower than others, and some would be faster than others. All these conversations would also take place in the base, not on the battlefield. Instead of supports granting passive bonuses, I'd also have each support yield stat boosts similar to the talk conversations in Fire Emblem 4, as well as certain conversations also yielding story-based bonuses, such as a character handing a rare weapon to another, or maybe even in some cases give other unique boosts. Here's an example. The A support between the game's main character and the Jagan would have the Jagan character finally acknowledging the main character as the true leader of the army, and the A support would end with the Jagan transferring his leadership stars over to the main character, finally stepping down and admitting that the main character has grown into a fine leader, whereas before said support, the Jagan would be more inclined to challenge his authority due to thinking that he's still green and inexperienced. Now, in another support between an archer and a fighter, the two would teach each other techniques from each other's fighting styles. The fighter would grant the archer some strength from the physical training, while the archer would boost the fighter's skill by teaching him aiming techniques. In an A support between a thief and a swordmaster, the thief pulls forth a brave sword he or she found looting a ruin, but had been holding on to. Each support in my game would be different, and depending on the story, would give various bonuses instead of just passive boosts whenever they are close to each other. Additionally, I would implement a completely brand new mechanic called the Compendium. Each character would have its own compendium, and every time you unlock a support conversation, a piece of the compendium is revealed, similar to how the obelisks in Heroes of Might and Magic worked, if you ever played those games. Once you have unlocked all of a character's support conversations, the compendium of that character will light up, and you will be rewarded with an achievement as well as a short cinematic or cutscene delving into that character's backstory, showing an important moment in their upbringing or a similar event, similar to how the memory prisms from Echoes used to work. Once a compendium is fully unlocked, said character will also get a permanent 5% increase to all of their growth rates. And by the way, the compendium is universal, meaning that it will affect all of your playthroughs. It is something that you can work on over the course of multiple games, and the goal is of course to unlock all of them, which will yield you with a very rare achievements. Alright, let's talk skills. I would incorporate the skill system from Fates, with each character having a unique personal skill. I really love those. I think that it added so much personality and flair to each individual playable unit. Similar to Fates, however, you would earn skills as you level up, but I would also have a branching skill tree, giving the player 2 or maybe even 3 different choices each time a new skill is acquired. For example, when your hero hits level 5, you have to make the choice between Luna or Sol. When your Swordmaster hits level 5, you have to pick between Astra or Deathblow. When your General hits level 5, you get the choice between Wary Fighter or Rally Defense. These are just random examples, don't take them too literally. The idea is just to present a branching skill tree, and I really think this would be a cool addition to the game. It would allow you to build your units differently each time, and your choices would really matter. Finally, let's talk inheritance. Yes, in my game, there will be a multi-generational warfare present similar to in Fire Emblem 4. But whereas Jugjal did 2 generations, I am a total madman, and I want to do 3 generations. Just like the developers had originally planned for Fire Emblem 4. Yes, it's actually true, look it up. Yep, you heard me. I want a Fire Emblem game that spans 3 entire generations. In addition to inheritance, choices made in each generation would impact the next. Sparing an enemy general, for example, in the first generation, instead of killing him, might make you face his son in the second generation, but in turn, that son would be recruitable as a potential playable unit if you complete certain objectives. Your choice to side or ally with an opposing house or faction might change the pairing of enemy nobles, for example, giving birth to different children down the line that might oppose you in various ways. As far as the inheritance system goes, however, I would like it to be a mix between Fire Emblem 4 and Awakening/Fates. Weapon inheritance won't be a thing, but parents will pass down growth rates and base stats to their children, as well as one skill from each parent of the player's choosing. In the case of units not being paired in any of the generations, I would include substitutes, similar to how Fire Emblem 4 did it in the second generation. Substitutes being baseline characters that replace the children that otherwise would be present if you had paired their parents up. They wouldn't be as weak though, compared to the substitutes of Fire Emblem 4. The power gap between the substitutes and the inheritance children would be just marginally noticeable, but they would come with the basic toolkits that would make them decent in their own rights. Also, only about half of the costs of the second and third generation would be actual children characters. Some would just be regular characters joining on their own merits, and some characters would also have forced story-based pairings, similar to Leaf and Altena, for example, who both have Quan and Etlin as their parents, regardless of what you do. There would also be a few characters that would be playable in multiple generations. There would be a young squire in the first generation, working under the main character, that would grow to be a powerful paladin in the second generation, and then he would eventually become an old Jagan-type character in the third, granted that you keep him alive, of course. There would also be a few characters here and there who would show up as older versions of themselves in the subsequent generation, but this would not happen very often, only with a very few rare select cases. Also, because I am a sucker for Jugdral's Holy Blood system, I would like to implement a slight bloodline feature in my game, but not anywhere near the scale of Fire Emblem 4's Holy Blood. I was never a big fan of certain characters just being completely overpowered because of their divine bloodline. Instead, each playable character in my game will have a blood type displayed in their statistics, inspired by the Tactician feature which got scrapped from the localized version of Fire Emblem 7. A character's blood type will have slight bearings on their growth rates, giving minor bonuses to some while giving minor penalties to others, ranging from 5 to 10%, no higher than that. When you pair 2 characters up, their children will get a blood type depending on their parents, which in turn will affect their growth rates. The idea behind this feature is merely to offer an additional layer of complexity for players who really likes to plan out their pairings in advance for the most optimal child units, while still not being significant enough to punish the players who choose to ignore the feature. There won't be a blood type combination that will make a character downright unplayable, but some combinations of blood types will be more fortunate than others depending on your pairings and your children. Again, this isn't meant to be some super advanced mechanic on par with the Holy Blood feature in Fire Emblem 4, it's just meant to be a neat little bonus for those who likes planning out their playthroughs in advance.
In 2001, a single year before Binding Blade's release in Japan, Advanced Wars came to North America for the first time on the Game Boy Advance, and with it, a feature to create your very own playable maps. This feature alone is the reason why me and my friends still play Advanced Wars to this very day, over 15 years later, as the ability to create our own maps and play against each other on those maps creates endless content only restricted by our own imagination. It is an amazing feature, and it is time to apply it to Fire Emblem. The similarities between Advanced Wars and Fire Emblem are quite obvious. After all, they are both developed by the same company. If Advanced Wars 1 allowed you to make maps this easily back in 2001, there's absolutely no excuse why the same format can't be applied to Fire Emblem as well. Hell, the hacking community of Serenus Forest have already spent years picking apart and editing existing ROMs to create their own custom Fire Emblem games, so it's not like people aren't already doing it. However, hacking ROMs is a tedious and lengthy process filled with bugs and a lot of work, so it's about time Intelligent Systems makes it a bit easier for hackers to express their creative talents. My Fire Emblem game would come with a map editor as well as a campaign editor, allowing you to make maps and string them together with custom cutscenes, your very own script and custom dialogue, and of course, your very own custom-made characters. I would also include a huge online database directly connected to the game, allowing people to upload, download, play, and even rate the maps and campaigns made by other players. In my opinion, allowing your community the freedom of a complete sandbox experience in terms of creating their own content is what truly immortalizes a game. I know Nintendo seem to think that DLC is the only viable way to prolong content these days, but this feature will not only make players happy, it will also ensure that they never run out of things to do. Giving players the ability to create their own content is all well and good for adding replayability to the game, but in my opinion, it's not enough. The main story also needs to be something that players will want to revisit and replay multiple times. Naturally, my Fire Emblem game will feature different difficulty levels, ranging from normal, hard, and lunatic, alongside a classic and casual option like so many games before it, but I want to take it one step further and add special modes which can be attached to a playthrough to drastically change it, ensuring that no game feels the same. Anyone who has ever played the XCOM series will know of the feature called Second Waves. Basically, they are little modifications which you can add to the game for added replayability. Well, my special modes will be just like that. Whenever you start your game, you will get the option to add as many modes as you like to your playthrough. Here's a short list of the ideas that I have. Iron Man mode, a mode that prevents you from saving in between chapters. You can only exit and resume games where you left off. Trying to soft reset your console will just put you back where you left off. If you get a game over in this mode, your save file gets deleted. Randomized mode. When selected, all of your playable characters will have their starting classes and starting equipment randomized. You also get an additional option to randomize enemy bosses as well. Anyone who has ever watched my multiple randomized Let's Plays on YouTube will know exactly what this mode will be like. Reversed recruitment mode. This mode reverses the join time of all playable characters, allowing you a different playthrough where the endgame characters join before the early game ones. Obviously, characters' levels will be scaled to match their join time. Growthless mode. This mode sets the growth rates of all your playable characters to 0%, forcing you to rely on their base stats, promo gains, and stat boosters. If you ever watch Dundon and Mecha's playthroughs, you know exactly how this mode will operate, and it will present a really difficult challenge to veterans of the game. Paragon mode. This mode doubles the XP gains of all your playable characters. It obviously makes your playthrough easier, but it's made for players who want to fool around a bit with builds and different characters, or maybe to make a specific combination of other modes a little bit easier to tackle. Storyless mode. This mode doesn't change the game itself, it just auto-skips all cinematics and dialogue. This is intended for speedrunners who want as few interruptions as possible whenever they play, as well as for players who have played the main story of the game so many times they'd rather not just skip through things manually. Sandbox mode. This mode allows you to insert your very own custom-made playable characters into the main story. You can either change parts of the roster, or you can change the entire roster. Anyone who has ever watched my Coring Quest playthroughs will know how entertaining this can be. These are just some of the modes I've thought about. More could be added through patches or maybe even DLC. If I didn't make it clear enough, multiple of these modes can be selected for each playthrough, adding a platitude of different playthroughs that a player can select between. For example, if you want a randomized, growthless, reversed recruitment Paragon mode run, well, now you have it. Imagine the Let's Play possibilities and the different various challenges players could undertake with this. The possibilities are truly endless, and that's what I think a Fire Emblem game should be like. Now, let's talk about multiplayer. I would include an arena-style battle mode similar to the Game Boy Advance games, allowing you to make teams from your own playthroughs, or maybe even from your custom character pool, to battle against each other. However, I would also add a multiplayer mode where you get to control Fire Emblem units on an overland map and battle strategically against other players, similar to how Shadow Dragon did it. However, I won't go into a lot of detail on this topic here, because in the future I plan to make a separate video about how to balance Fire Emblem PvP, using elements from the Advanced Wars series as inspiration and trying to solve some of the underlying issues that multiplayer Fire Emblem poses, so you can all look forward to that. The multiplayer mode that I would want to add, however, is something that has never even been attempted, or dare I say, even considered by Intelligent Systems. I want to add a Fire Emblem co-op mode, allowing you and up to 3 friends to share a save game together online. How would this work? Well, it's quite simple, really. You as a host could invite up to 3 friends to one of your save games through wireless connection, and before each map, during the battle preparations, you and your friends would simply split the playable units you have among each other. Then as the game begins, each of you take your own separate player faces controlling your units. This feature may sound a bit clunky, as Fire Emblem by its very nature is a single-player game. However, imagine the amazing Let's Play possibilities this would offer. You could have me, Ghasts, Ray, and Mecha all play a game of Fire Emblem together. Imagine the hilarious possibilities to screw each other over using this feature. We could even do a saboteur run where certain players try to screw up the game intentionally, shoving friendly units into enemy range or trading away their equipment on player face. The co-op mode would also allow you to introduce Fire Emblem to a friend or a loved one in a very fun and interesting way. Alright, so we are nearing the end of the video, and it's already getting pretty long as it is, but before we jump into the final segment, which is going to cover the story and general setting of my game, I'm just going to list some features that I couldn't fit into any of the other segments. Classes will be inspired by a genealogy of the Holy War, with Duke Knights, Wind Mages, etc. Weapon ranks will be fixed based on class. There will be some enemy-exclusive classes such as Barons and Master Knights. There will be branch promotions like in the Sacred Stones. Units will automatically promote at level 21 like they did in Path of Radiance. But they can use Master Seals to promote earlier. Second Seals will be in the game, but they won't reset the level of the unit when used. There will be Guidance Chapters and branching paths. Mounted units will get a slight movement reduction on indoor maps. The main lord will function as the convoy. Alright, it's time to talk about the story and setting of my game. However, since this would most likely be an entire video in and of itself, I'm not going to list a full script with detailed events, characters, backstories, and story arcs. Instead, I'm just going to talk about the general setting of my game, what I want to focus on, and things I would like to avoid. As for the general setting of my game, I would like it to be set in a traditional Fire Emblem world. I was toying around a bit with some crazy concepts like Renaissance Emblem with musketeers and guns, as well as a pirate Emblem game set in a Caribbean-style world with pirate ships, treasure hunts, and cursed islands, but at the end of the day, I decided on a world that would feel sorta similar to the Drugdraw games, but with a slight hint of the old Roman Empire about it, as I am a sucker for Roman history, as anyone who knows me will attest to. I am also very steadfast in having this universe not having any obvious ties to any existing ones. This isn't Drugdraw 1000 years in the future or anything like that.
I think that if Fates did one thing right, it was setting itself apart from the rest of the Fire Emblem worlds. That made it feel new, fresh, and exciting, and it also made the developers unable to cash in on cheap nostalgia and references, which I think Fire Emblem does a bit too liberally these days. Fanservice is all well and good, but we also need originality. In terms of my story, I would really want to move away from a few archetypical cliches that Fire Emblem tends to recycle time and time again. In particular, the strong evil empire suddenly invades small peaceful nation plots. I would also not feature a dark cult of priests manipulating a kingdom or king behind the scenes in an attempt to revive their dark god, nor would I have a big evil dragon threatening to destroy the world. The antagonists in my game would be regular people with aspirations and goals. They wouldn't just be evil for the sake of being evil. I'd want something similar to Arvis from Fire Emblem 4. I think he is a great villain because he actually makes sense and he doesn't just go around messing things up because he can. You still hate him, of course, but you can at the very least sympathize with his actions. The main point of conflict in my story would arise from an alliance of the four most influential and powerful houses on the continent entering into an alliance with each other. Through this alliance, they form a union that's much stronger than the rest of the nation's houses combined, and they slowly start to use this power to collect taxes and tributes to sustain themselves. This completely cripples the outlying houses, who are situated close to the borders where bandit attacks are ever more frequent, and the people suffering more and more as a result of the lesser houses growing weaker and less able to defend themselves. You see, the bandits in my world will be a much more potent force than in the other Fire Emblem games. Similar to the Goths, the Gauls, the Huns, and the other tribes that the Romans had to constantly deal with, these barbarians won't just be small fry hanging around in mountains, picking off a caravan or killing a peasant every now and then, but instead an ever-growing threat on the border that must be constantly staved off for the nation's security. However, also like the barbarians the Romans fought against, these guys aren't all evil. Many of them are merely fleeing famine or war and simply want lands to settle on. I'd really try to move away from the ugly, stupid Fire Emblem brigand stereotype. In my world, even the bandits would have their own dreams and aspirations. The main character of my game will be a young knight of a lesser house that has been hit particularly hard by the four houses and their evil alliance. Bandits are roaming the countryside and his house is on the brink of collapse. Despite knowing full well that he will draw the ire of the powerful houses, he decides to form a small alliance with the nearby houses to try and work out a solution. However, he soon finds that the situation is much more dire than he first anticipated, and that the corruption runs extremely deep in the nation. Some parts of the border have all but collapsed, and the barbarians are threatening to amass an attack deeper into the empire, yet the nobles do nothing. This conflict will span generations, and so it will also have multiple main characters who will be related to one another. The main character of the second generation will be the daughter of the young knight of the first, who tries hard to follow in her father's footsteps and finish what he started. The third generation will have two main characters, the son and daughter of the woman of the second generation, ending the story with two siblings working to finish the events set in motion by their grandfather, and finally attempt to free their nation from the oppressive, corrupt alliance that is slowly devouring the entire nation from within. Anyway, that's as far as I can go without delving completely into details on events. As you may notice, I'm drawing a lot of inspiration from Roman history, and that's because the Roman Empire is my favorite historical subject. I know that this is just a skeletal frame of a story, but as I said, I think this could be an entire other video on its own, so I don't really want to go deeper right now. But this is what I would like to work with, and I think it could produce a fantastic and compelling story. Alright, that was probably the longest scripted Fire Emblem video I have ever done, and it feels absolutely amazing to finally be finished. This video has been circulating around in my brain for years, but I just never found the spark to actually sit down and make it, because I knew how much work it would be. I think I worked at least 3 weeks on it. If you watched all the way to the end, I'd really appreciate anything you could do to help me spread this video to the far corners of the internet, so that it can be shared to as many people as possible who will find enjoyment in watching it. I could ask for no greater gifts. Also, if you wouldn't mind dropping a like and a comment, that really helps this video get featured on YouTube, allowing others to find my channel. I'd also really love to hear your thoughts on my ideas and this game. Would you buy it if it came out? Is there anything you would add or subtract from it? I know I always ask you guys to be vocal, but for this video in particular, I really want to hear your opinions. So let me know what you think about it. Thank you again so much for watching. My name has been Mangs. Merry Christmas to you all and a Happy New Year. Let's hope 2018 brings us a new Fire Emblem game.